Good morning. Come on, it's so good to be with you. And just such an honor and a joy to be here. If I haven't had the chance to meet you, my name is Phil, and I have the privilege of being the lead pastor here at the Square. And in case this is the first time or you're new or you just didn't get the message, to this Sunday is Emily and I's last Sunday before we go on sabbatical for the next 2 months. And thank you. Yeah, we're excited. And haven't, honestly, the amount of work we've done to get ready to go to sabbatical has had my attention. I'm pretty sure I'll think about it tonight when we're packing. Yes. Yeah, that's the plan. There you go. And we're genuinely just so excited. And if you just didn't get, we wrote a letter that if you didn't get it, you can find it at the Connect booth, and it's out front. And just explains our heart and why we're taking this step and what it means for us. And again, just to continue to reiterate, for us, this is an intentional decision to take time to rest and settle our hearts, because we believe that God has invited us to lead and pastor here at the Square for a long time. And we want to not only live, but example just what wholeness and health looks like in spirit and in mind and in body. And so for us, this is an incredible moment, though it's been challenging, and we're going to miss you. And today I just want to share my heart for you. We get to close Psalm 23. We get to also take communion together. And then at the end, I just have a few simple invitations about what this next season is about. Let me read Psalm 23 to you one last time. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all of the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And together over the last several weeks, we've looked at this psalm together about what it's inviting us to understand. David, who writes this psalm, a shepherd boy made king, is teaching us something about the character and nature of God, and then what is true about our lives that are bound within him. And for David, he didn't want to just give you ethereal concepts. He wanted to give you something to hold on to. As a shepherd is to his sheep, so we can look to the Lord and trust in him. And so here through this psalm, he invites us into the depth of the character and nature of God and who he is towards us, constantly weaving in the imagery of a shepherd. And as we've looked, this psalm has so much substance in life that's often missed because many of us did not grow up as shepherds 3,000 years ago in the deserts of Israel. And so there's a depth of meaning that we often don't fully allow to come and speak to us. And my heart has been for us to see how much Psalm 23 is trying to show us. Right? The psalm begins, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. It is a statement. And the rest of the psalm is simply unpacking why that statement is true. David declares, I have a shepherd in God. And because of this, I lack nothing. And this truth, this invitation to a life of fulfillment, a life of hope, a life of abundance, a life of wholeness is actually the dream in the heart of God for us. But often we take that and twist it and manipulate it. Remember, a life that lacks nothing is not a life that has everything. A life that lacks nothing is a life that doesn't walk through hardship. A life that lacks nothing is a life defined at the table of God, where we begin to realize that what we have in him is sufficient. And what we'll find in him is more than sufficient. And as the psalm moves on, right, just to lead us all to this same moment, he makes us lie down in green pastures. He leads us beside quiet waters. He refreshes our soul. He invites us into rest. That Jesus, our shepherd, wants to invite us into what the substance of true rest is. And in this generation, we need it like never before. There is an ache in our souls that no vacation can figure out, that no time off that can figure out, no change of job or scenery can change, because it is not a practical problem. It is a deep spiritual problem. Because rest is not a disposition of an amount of time you take. It is a disposition of trust. And until we learn to trust God, we will actually never learn how to truly rest in our inner person. But Jesus, our shepherd, knows how to teach us to rest. He walks us along right paths for his name's sake, that he not only teaches us to rest, he teaches us to flourish. He knows the journeys of our lives, where to go, where not to go. As we learn his ways and his rhythms, he invites us into this radical life of flourishing, abiding in his presence, abiding in his ways of transformation. And though sometimes we do walk through dark valleys, through caverns of darkness, shades of death itself, we fear no evil because Jesus walks with us. And his rod and his staff, they comfort us. His correction and his guidance and his protection, the way he leads us and unifies us. When we move towards isolation, he moves us back to community. When something is coming after us, he is a protector who stands to defend us. And ultimately, this journey is leading us to a table, a place we belong, a place we will flourish. But some unexpected things happen at this table. We find that it's not just simply a table for us. It's a table that has room for others. And actually, the life that lacks nothing is a life that just doesn't simply let the chaos and the pain and the brokenness that was simply remain. It's a place where reconciliation and restoration flourish. And it's here we get to these final visions. That you anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And I believe it's this line here in Psalm 23. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life. That I believe to be the invitation of David, your shepherd, who's writing this psalm to you, to understand God, your shepherd, who wants to lead your life in a unique way. And even though last week I told you that the invitation at the heart of the psalm, this way we walk through valleys of shadows of death, is the ultimate invitation of, do we trust our shepherd? I would tell you that it's this line about goodness and love that follows you. That is the line we don't believe in the psalm. But the reason we don't believe it is because we don't ultimately see what David is trying to say. I love this picture, you anoint my head with oil. This is a normal, somewhat normal biblical picture, right? There's this storyline in the scriptures that oil is a picture of the presence of God. And there are times where people are set aside for certain seasons or tasks, and they are anointed with oil. It is a demonstration of the presence of God going with someone, sustaining someone, blessing someone. But it's not just that somebody is being anointed with, they're being set aside for a sacred thing. Certainly David is picking up on these analogies as he begins to weave both shepherding imagery and imagery of the kingdom of God into the midst of this. But what we don't understand is that he is most certainly speaking as a shepherd at the same time. There's a reason shepherds would anoint a sheep's head with oil, because they were in pain. You see, sheep are actually far more clueless than we ever want to really admit. I know we've talked about this, and there's a great humility that comes with Psalm 23. Sheep have no ability to defend themselves from any predator. Sheep have no ability to find their own way. They can't regulate what they drink. They can't regulate what they eat. They are the most dependent, existent animal in creation, right? Except you and me. We just like to believe otherly. And sheep not only face all of these enemies, but they face another, flies. Now, what we don't understand, because most of us didn't grow up as Middle Eastern shepherds, right? And so this is foreign territory for us, is that the densest part of the wool on a sheep is in their head. And of course, they have hooves. They don't have the ability to kind of move things around. And in that, what would actually happen very often is that flies would come in and they would settle. And it would be very annoying and very frustrating to the sheep. But the real danger wasn't just that there was a frustration or annoyance, that these flies, if they were allowed to stay, they would lay eggs and larvae, and actually in through a sheep's nose could actually settle in and burrow into their brain and cause madness and kill the sheep. You actually can Google videos of sheep that have gotten to this point, and you'll see that shortly before they die, that they'll just be ramming their head against a wall because they feel such an internal pain. This is the picture. And sheep, when they are in this place, they have no ability to help themselves, but they do know this, that they have a shepherd who cares about them. And so they would come to their shepherd, and a shepherd actually is able to, one of the first times I was in Israel, we had the chance to sit and have conversations with a Bedouin shepherd, and they kind of were even talking about this, that shepherds know when their sheep are in pain. There's just a knowing that happens. And when that happens, what they do is they take a sheep, they pull it close to them, they grab oil, and they pour it over their head, and they massage it through their head. One, it brings comfort to the sheep. And two, this unique oil, what it does is it keeps any flies or anything from being able to pack itself into the sheep's head. It's protective. And when David here says, you anoint my head with oil, certainly he's living in the both and, the biblical picture of God who anoints for a future, who sets us aside for a future, who blesses us with his presence, who secures us by his presence. But he is also speaking as a shepherd saying, you have a God who's not annoyed with you. You have a God who doesn't find your problems petty. You have a God that when you're in pain, small or large, knows it. And he wants to come and he wants to bring comfort and love and mercy and blessing. And I've come to understand that you and I, we have these ways, we just function independently. And I've discovered it's amazing to me how late people come to God and people with their problems. As a pastor, this is one of the things I have discerned. Most people raise their hand, I'm having a problem, 5 to 10 years after they should have raised their hand. What is it about us as human beings that stops us and robs us from believing that there's a shepherd who can help us, who wants to help us, and a community that he's given us to walk with us? Well, I think it's really two things. It's because we have this really broken dynamic of thinking way too little of ourselves and way too much of ourselves at the same time. There's two reasons we don't get help. The first is because you believe you don't deserve it and that you're not worth it and that your problems are too petty for God or his people. Shame will lead you to not get help because you've bought into a storyline that says, I'm not worthy of it or I'm not important enough. It's amazing how much that happens. But the exact opposite can be true. A self-righteousness. I don't need help. Yes, you do. It's amazing how these two things bounce along inside of us and stop us from actually the work that Jesus wants to do. And I just want to tell you this morning, you have a shepherd who knows when you're in pain. There's no reason to hide from him. There's no reason to be independent from him. He has oil and he wants to bless you with it. He wants to comfort you with it. He wants to care for you in it. And something happens when you actually realize that I have full access to the throne room of God and I'm not a bother to him. I'm actually a son or a daughter. I'm telling you, transformation happens at the moment you believe God actually feels how he says he feels about you. Do you know that Hebrews says that I can run boldly into the throne of grace even in the midst of my own sin? Because my security in Jesus' righteousness has established a pathway to Jesus that never gets undone. Doesn't mean Jesus isn't a good father who meets me in my struggles or meets me in my poor decisions and walks out the consequences or the realities of them. But this is the beauty of what Jesus says. There is not a moment in my life, even my rebellion against him, that he doesn't want to help me with. I believe something could shift so deeply in us if we could actually see that. And then David says, my cup overflows. And this is when you begin to realize David is not just simply writing as a shepherd about a moment that he wants you to understand about the character and nature of God. The Holy Spirit is sitting with David writing about something he doesn't fully understand. Because in the midst of this book, suddenly a table and a cup present themselves. And here David certainly had meaning. A cup was always a picture in an ancient culture, especially of a king who was writing a piece of poetry about a deep sense of identity. It was a representation of your personhood in many ways. And a cup that was overflowing was a picture of abundance. Even this word, revaya, which is what translated in our passages as overflowing, it literally means abundance. This is why in this passage, what Jesus is trying to get inside of our hearts, what David is trying to accomplish is that there is a vision of abundance in God. There is a cup that overflows, but what is unique, this is a word of abundance that is only used twice in the entire Old Testament, different than every other kind because it is a distinct kind of abundance. Let me show you the two things this word means, and they're always bound in connection to each other. First is abundance. Second is breath, wind, or spirit. It's an abundance of God himself. Friends, you have a cup that is overflowing. You have a cup that does not run dry. And it's a cup filled by the Spirit of God himself. The reason we struggle sometimes to live in flourishing and abundance, to find this vision of a life that lacks nothing, is because we keep trying to fill our cup with anything but the presence of God. I can stand here 5 weeks in a row and tell you a life that lacks nothing is not a life that has everything. And somewhere in our spirit, we just still go, yeah, but. There is a shift that can only take place in us when we realize that the abundance that has been provided to us, which, by the way, does spill into our real lives in the sense of our marriages and our children and our jobs and our futures and our decisions and our dreams. It's not as if this, God is not a dualistic, Gnostic God that is somehow doing this spiritual thing that has no impact on your body or your flesh or your real life. God is a God of both and he moves in the spirit to break out into the physical. But what he wants you to see is that until you catch a vision that the abundance of your heart and the abundance that you were made for is an abundance of his presence, you'll constantly be searching for a flourishing that just leaves you lacking. See, there's a reason he is writing it in this way, because what he's trying to get you to see is that every time you would actually try to answer this question out of your own decisions, out of your own wisdom, you are going to answer it in a different way. And that what God actually wants you to see is there is an abundance, but it's abundance marked by his presence. And see, this was meant to always mark the people of God. See, Jesus wants to teach us how to be a people of a permanency of his presence. This is why Moses in Exodus 33, he's talking with God about going into the promised land. What does he say? If your presence doesn't go with us, I won't go. Because what God had worked out in Moses, what he was trying to work out in Israel, which he's trying to work out in us, is that his presence is the real promised land. See, if we don't come to Psalm 23 and let Jesus give us this truth, his presence is the promised land. His presence is the promised land. It isn't that there aren't promised lands in the midst of that he wants to give us, but his presence is the ultimate promised land. And where his presence does not go, we will not go. That is a life that can start to enter in and go, man, I have a life that lacks nothing because I've caught the vision of the one thing. It's his presence. People ask me all the time, especially when I'm talking with other pastors, what is success? What is success as a pastor? How do you know that you gathered and it was successful? How do you know that what you're doing is successful? How do you actually, what marks? Because we all know this, for a long time, we have lived in the world's visions of success. What is success in the world? Well, it's growth, it's money, it's popularity, it's influence. And God can give and move in the midst of those things at times. He's not a God who's limited by anything. But those are not God's visions of success. God's vision of success is three things: obedience, fruit, and his presence. His presence. You know the question I ask every Sunday? Like, did we honor and host the presence of God? He's our promised land. I don't want to go anywhere without him. There's no flourishing without him. There's no anointing without him. There's no cup without him. There's nothing. It is his presence. See, David is constantly trying to point us back to this one beautiful vision. When we set our eyes on what we were made for, which is a table face to face with God, you'll find that the table lacks nothing. So it doesn't matter what you lack. The table lacks nothing. And the table is yours. Because Jesus has offered it to you. And then this line, surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life. This word, follow me, it's an interesting word. Again, I think there's so much that just as we try to translate these texts become challenging, because I would actually say this is the part of the Psalm 23 that I think gets missed the most, or it carries such a different meaning. And because the word radaf that is here is not what we would think. It's not a little following. It's not like a kind little path. It is actually, the depth of the meaning is when you are being pursued aggressively and being chased, and it's meant to be read in conflict, pain, and war. And I want you to see this picture, because again, we have to go back to shepherding analogy. The picture that David takes you on is a picture of a journey of a shepherd and their sheep. And certainly at the end of the day, that journey of shepherd and sheep, they're coming back to the pen. And we're going to find the last line, the pen that we belong to. And he's leading us back to the journey of the pen. And this is actually the most dangerous moment of the time for sheep. Why? Because it's actually at dusk, at twilight, when it's starting to get dark. Sheep are tired. If anybody got injured along the way, if anyone got disconnected along the way, it's where wolves understand that they have their easiest targets. So this is actually a place where panic sets in for the sheep, where concern sets in for the shepherd. And as they're coming back to the pen, this is the place, right? And there's a sense that this is the place you get chased. This is the place you get tested. This is the place where uncertainty gets created. And there's that sense of being chased that is actually in the expectation of what could be possible. I was thinking about this. There was this moment in my life when Emily and I met. I was 19. If you've been part of our church for a while, you know these stories. Emily and I met in Chiang Mai, Christmas Day, 2001, ice skating. It's a really romantic story. Hallmark sale still pending. We'll work on that in sabbatical. But it's actually our true story. And I was there working in a UN refugee camp. Emily was teaching in an orphanage, and we had the chance to meet and fall in love. And I was skinnier and had hair. So if you're like, how did that happen? But it was in this time that actually for several months I was in a UN refugee camp. But before that, I was in a couple of weeks just in the middle of the Thai hill tribes, working in a really remote village, kind of in the middle of the jungle. And we were at this orphanage. And in the evenings, we would just kind of create a campfire and sit together. And you gotta imagine like a Thai village field of dreams type picture, because they had a soccer field, but it was a soccer field that was just cut out of the jungle, right? So there's the orphanage, there's the road into the orphanage, the road out of the orphanage, and then there's a jungle, and right cut into the jungle is a soccer field. Well, we would go hang out in the soccer field, we would have fire. And I was there, one of my best friends, Joel, he's still one of my best friends, he pastors in Pennsylvania, he's an amazing man. We met in this time, and we were there together, and we were 19. Right? And this is not a statement to, 19-year-olds are amazing, but we had this thing that we were working out, figuring out how to be men, pressing, we were just, and this was basically the way Joel and I functioned. Joel was one of those guys, still is to this day in a really mature way, is that was a risk taker, was just he's gonna act like that, he's gonna just run into danger, he's that kind of person. And I viewed it as my job to keep Joel alive, right? That was basically the way our friendship worked for several years. And And I was always a little more cautious or timid, or let's think through this, or let's be balanced, like let's, these kind of things. And we're having all these conversations about who knows what. But we got into a conversation about how there are wild animals in the jungle, and we're in an area that there's known tigers and different things, and how I grew up in Idaho. He grew up in Taiwan. We're talking about all these different things, and all of a sudden Joel, he pulls out this knife and his flashlight. He's like, I'm gonna go hunt something. I'm like, Joel, that's a bad idea. Joel, that's a bad idea. I mean, I was like, what are you, that's a bad, but it was, I don't know what it was. Again, it was just, it'd been a while since, we had been in a normal situation. And Joel is just like, we're going, so he runs into the jungle. And I'm like, I gotta go with him. Like, this is my job. This is my part of the friendship. He does dumb things, I keep him alive, and we have great fun and experiences in the middle of it, right? So I remember, I'm like, Joel, what are you doing? And we had some other people that were there with us around the camp, not in our conversation, but at a campfire. And I think it was about 6 of the people. Most of them were girls, and we were there talking. And Joel is like, literally just like walking through the jungle. He's got a knife in one hand, a flashlight in one hand. I'm trailing behind him like, Joel. And he lifts up his flashlight, and then he just hits this pair of eyes. I have never, I've told you other stories. Like, I've never actually had real fear like this. Joel and I scream, and we start running, and like godly, just mature men, we just run right past all of the girls on our team. And we are just screaming, there's a tiger, like literally in a straight panic. You gotta imagine, we were in this corner area. It's like a jungle, like a soccer field cut into a jungle. And so where we're running back to the orphanage, there's just a line, the jungle is right next to us. It was just like, so from behind us, but to the side of us was the jungle. And what this thing was running on the inside of all of the brush and the leaves. It was very dense and thick, and we could hear it running after us. I was convinced I was gonna die. And I was like overwhelmed with fear, and we got to the point where the orphanage was. There's a fence, kind of like a fence anything could get through and still kill you, kind of like the fence in the front of our church. Right? But I remember I jump over and I look around, and Joel and I are standing there, all like people are panicked. People are crying and running. We're screaming, tiger, 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 running towards the orphanage. And then all of a sudden, just this out of the jungle just jumps out this like 1.5 foot tiny, small, hairless dog. And you just don't know how to like orient yourself in that moment. And Emily can attest to this, right? Emily can attest to this. I don't know why, but there's dogs everywhere in Thailand. Like it's just a normal thing. Like dogs just running around everywhere in Thailand. And this poor little guy, he was sick. Like he was struggling. Like if there's a dog that should never provoke fear in any human being ever. In fact, all you want to do is like just be like, I'm so sorry you exist. Like you just like feel so it was just like, but this dog just jumps out. But I remember just being like, I couldn't bring down the panic. I literally could not bring down the panic. Because like in that, again, it wasn't when we saw those eyes in the flashlight. It's the middle of the night. You gotta know, there's no running water, electricity for hundreds of miles. We're in the middle of nowhere, remote jungles of Thailand. All we had were like fires and torches but I remember that moment. I know what's funny. I remember just telling Joel, who I'll make sure listens to this sermon, and I love you, Joel. You're such a good man. I remember saying him, we will never tell anyone about this, right? It was very embarrassing. It was very embarrassing because it was not a show. Like we were in full panic, and caused quite a panic among other people that we had to figure out how to make up for. But when I think about this is my only moment in my life that can somehow even understand, because when David uses this word, this is what he's talking about. That something is chasing you. Something is aggressively coming towards you. And the expectation that this thing that is coming towards you is something that will harm you. But then David says the most unexpected thing. That when I look behind me and I see what's chasing me, it's not my enemies. It's not my past. It's his love and his goodness. like I felt something coming behind. But when I saw what it was his love and his goodness. And I think there's this question that like sits in our hearts. What is chasing me? Because I know this from my own life, and I know this from walking with the lives of others. There's a reason we don't know how to hold on to the promise of the abundance of God. And it's because we're being chased by our pasts. That we live life and we hear something behind us, and it's the voice of shame. We live our lives and we hear something behind us, and it's the voice of fear. We live our lives and we hear something behind us, it's the voice of insecurity, doubt, brokenness. We feel chased by our pasts. In a deep sense that says, one day, this is all going to catch up. We read the Bible less to believe God and more to find a loophole to finally have an excuse to not have to believe him. We read the Bible looking for that epiphany moment where he's not as good as he says he is. We actually have this thing happening within us because we have so normalized the voices of shame and fear of our past that we don't even know how to hold on to this idea that God's love and kindness go behind us. I want to look at these words, and we're going to move. Linz and team, you can come up. We're going to move towards communion. So when these two words that are used, I love them. One is actually probably the most significant word to describe the character and nature of God in the Old Testament and the Hebrew, the word, hesed, which is the loving kindness of God. It's God love. When the New Testament authors speak of agape, God love, they are referencing something that was already known and established about the character and nature of God. It was his hesed, his loving kindness, his nature, his disposition of love. But then how amazing is this? This other word, tobit, it literally that gets translated as goodness. This is its definition. To find something pleasant or agreeable and to have a disposition of favor towards it. Do you want to know what that is also the exact definition of? Grace. Charis. When David is writing this psalm, he's saying, I've learned something. I've learned something. I have a past that feels big. I've got enemies that feel looming. But I'm telling you, I look behind me, and what I've come to learn is that it's his love and his grace that are actually moving in my past. See, this is what makes Jesus a shepherd like no other. Because he's walking with us through our valleys. He's present in the moment. But he's not just present in the moment. He's not just walking through my valleys with me. As he is walking through my valleys with me, he is ahead of me, preparing a table for me. So I have a shepherd who walks with me in the moment, and I have a shepherd who has walked ahead of me into the future and into my future and is actively preparing how my valley leads to this table. So I have a shepherd who's in the moment with me, and I have a shepherd who is ahead of me, but I don't just have a shepherd in the moment and ahead of me. I have a shepherd who is behind me, who is actively working out my past. This is how full his love is, how great his grace is. That in my past, what I can't go back to, what I have no authority over, what I can't undo, there is my shepherd working out his love and grace towards me. He is looking at my past with favor and agreeableness and a disposition of love and mercy and self-sacrifice. When I hear what comes behind me, It might feel like my enemies. It might feel like my past. It might feel like my shame. It might feel like my fear. But I'm telling you, what's actually behind me is him. Jesus right now is actively working in your past, undoing its authority and its power and its way. This is the promises of God. This is why the beauty, when the law teaches us that what the enemy intends for evil, God turns for good. This is why Paul picks this up in the New Testament, this promise of the character of God, and he says all things work together for the good of those who love Jesus. These aren't theories. These aren't theologies. These aren't things that are actually to be understood in some like weird way. This is actually a demonstration of the character of God. Right now, he's in your past. And everything you think is going to catch up with you, everything you think that is coming after you, every essence of your story that is just going to show up again and again, everything that makes you want to bang your head against the wall and go, I just don't know how to do this. They've met something. They've met a shepherd who has authority over every dimension of your life. And he is the one who is navigating every part of you, even the stories that have already happened. He's a God undoing what you cannot undo. He's a God redeeming what you cannot redeem. He's a God establishing what you cannot establish. And it's this. When you begin to realize that what David is saying is that your past is not chasing you. The love and grace of Jesus are chasing you. When I started the teaching, I mentioned a story, and if you missed it or this is a new week for you, if you could go back to the first teaching, that all of this started for me out of a distinct moment. The 2020 carried a unique experience of pain. And obviously, I don't mean that in the trajectory of 2020. I think we're all done talking about 2020, but I'm speaking that in my own life, the circumstances of things that were happening around me had awakened a point of fear, uncertainty, insecurity. I felt like things were crumbling around me. Everything I'd built my life. I remember I shared this story, how not knowing what would happen, I cried. I was sitting on the back porch of our offices late at night, and I was just crying out to God. And I said to him, you have to protect our church. It feels like everything's crumbling. And God, in his kindness, always stands as the protector of the church. He's the only true protector of the church. But he knew that even though these were the words I said, it's not what I was actually praying. I was saying, God, I'm afraid. I feel like I'm in a valley. I don't know what's ahead of me. And I hear what's coming behind me, and it is fear. It is insecurity. It is a sense that no matter how hard I work, it's not going to be enough. I can point to this moment where I felt abandoned. I can point to this moment where I felt abandoned. I can point to this moment where I felt abandoned, and that's inevitably going to happen again. I remember just that my heart felt the chase of my enemies. I was dining at a table with people I did not know how to come face to face with. I felt lost, insecure, unable, and I was crying out to God, and this is where he spoke back. I'll protect you. I said, God, you have to protect our church, but he knew that's not what I was asking. And so he says, no, Phil, I'm not going to do what you're asking, but I'll protect you if you'll let me. And it was here that night, I just started reading Psalm 23. And I got to this line, surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life. And I wrote just a simple thing in a journal. It said, God has promised me that love and mercy are following me. Do I believe him? Do I believe it? And it's here that I just wrote the line, from the New Testament story of a request for healing. Jesus says, "Do you believe?" And the person responds this incredibly beautifully human moment. "I believe. Help me with my unbelief." And in response to the question, I just wrote this: "I believe. Help me with my unbelief." And friends, to be honest, I did not know what I was praying. And what God began to do by the power of His Spirit was show me all of the places that I could not see. The pain emerged into my life where I did not believe that His goodness and His mercy were chasing me down. All these places I had believed the lies of fear, the lies of insecurity, the lies of insufficiency. And God, piece by piece, in hidden ways, took me on a journey of revealing to me all of the places I had partnered with lies. Because there's a reason we partner with lies. Because we're afraid. And in the first moment of them, lies feel safe. They're not safe. They terrorize you. They abuse you. They mistreat you. They're not safe. And what I found is that the more and more I had actually allowed those lies, as small or insidious as they may have seemed, to become normalized in my heart, it robbed me from knowing the true character of God. You don't know what's in my past? The goodness and love of God. You want to know what has authority over my story? The Spirit of God. You want to know what determines my future? The righteousness of God. You want to know what holds me, what frames me, what secures me? Jesus, my shepherd. And what Jesus wants to do is to show you that there are things that you have let into our hearts. We have let into our hearts and our minds that have come in and they have found their way. And it's robbing your abundance, your flourishing, and your hope. Because you're at a table. And they're at a table that lacks nothing. Well, you don't even know how to believe the table because you believe the enemies that are chasing you from behind. I want to invite you this morning to look behind and to come and find what I found. I'm not being chased by my past. I'm not being chased by my fears. I'm being hunted down by the relentless kindness of God, who establishes my present and my future. My past lacks nothing. My present lacks nothing. And my future lacks nothing, because they all belong to the one who lacks nothing. And it's only the work that Jesus the shepherd could do. Trenton team, if you want to pass out communion. David closes with this simple statement: I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That phrase, forever, Yamim Le'orek, I want to just, what it actually means is today and forevermore. It's not a one day out there. It's a right here, right now, and forever. So you want to know the reason you can live a life that lacks nothing? Because you dwell with the one who lacks nothing. You dwell with the one who leads you to himself. This journey starts with the character of God and ends with the house of God. And that's who our shepherd is. He leads us home. And it's an abundance we have in the here and now. And it's an abundance we will have forever. What I don't know if David knew, but the Spirit certainly did, is that David wasn't just writing about an idea of a shepherd. He was writing about one shepherd, a shepherd named Jesus, our Messiah, the promised one, the anointed one. You begin to see that David speaks about a shepherd. Jesus says in John 10, I am the good shepherd who lays his life down for the sheep. A shepherd who leads us to rest. Jesus says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened. I will give you rest, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. A shepherd who has right paths that Jesus establishes, because Jesus is our right path. He established righteousness that we could enter into that righteousness by faith. The story of faith which binds us together, that from the beginning, Abram believed God. Faith, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness, and he inherited not just right standing with God, but all of God's inheritance itself. And this is what Jesus has come and done for us. That when we place our faith in him, we receive his righteousness. And there's a reason we can walk through dark valleys and fear no evil, because our shepherd walked in it first. He walked into the valley of death and sin itself and established a victory for us. And there is a table and a cup. A table of his presence, a table of his body broken, and a table of his blood shed. And it is a table that lacks nothing, where you come face to face with God. Jesus set a table for his enemies, us, that while we were still sinners, enemies from God, he loved us, made a way for us, so we could be face to face with the Father. And now we, in his name, get to do the very same thing. We get to set tables for the world. There is an anointed one. There is a spirit who wants to fill you. And there is a love and a grace that goes behind you. And you are able to say, I will dwell in the house of the Lord. I will dwell in the presence of the Lord forever. Jesus is your shepherd. He's established your past, your present, and your future. And it's time to realize that what you think is chasing you has no authority over you. And to believe the work of Jesus and to come into his presence, face to face with God, and establish what he has done. I want to take communion together. I've asked Lynn, I want you to go ahead and just lead in worship before we take communion together. And as we just come, I want to just invite you in this place. You can stay seated. And we'll take communion after this. This is the question I felt like I needed to put in front of you. Would you be willing this morning to tell God, I believe you. Help me with my unbelief. And I give you fair warning. Your unbelief is ugly. Mine was. Your unbelief goes deeper than you might know. Mine did. My unbelief was attached to pain. Pain I wanted to protect myself from. But God met me with his love and his grace. And there is a future of a flourishing, because I actually know what's behind me now. And it's him. And he wants to do the same thing in you. So come on, may we pray. Lindsay is just going to sing over us and just enter into a moment in a time of worship to just let our hearts settle before God. Jesus, we love you. We ask even now that as we just close this time, as we come to you in your presence, that you would meet us here. We take this bread and we ask that you would fill it with your supernatural life by the power of your Spirit. We take this juice and we ask, God, that you would fill it, vivify it with your very life. We come to your table, supernatural in its ways, that you would meet us, speak to us, guide us, prepare our hearts, God, and would you do a work of teaching us the true story of who you are and who we are. In Jesus' name. In Jesus' name. Come on, let's just worship for a moment. I'll come and lead us through communion.
I don't have enough words. I'll never live enough lifetime to fully know your word, to know all that you deserve. All of my deception, all of my duplicity. Now there is no record. You assume the best of me. And this is how I thank the Lord for loving me and keeping me when I was weak. This is how I thank the Lord for everything. This is how I thank the Lord. All of my attentions, everything I have to give, the sum of my affections are measured in the praise I lift. And this is how I thank the Lord for saving me when I was weak. This is how I thank the Lord for everything. This is how I thank the Lord. Oh, this is how I thank the Lord for saving me and keeping me when I was weak. This is how I thank the Lord for everything. This is how I thank the Lord. And I will sing, I will sing, I will lift my praises to you. I will sing, I will sing. This is how I praise the Lord. And I will sing, I will sing, I will lift my praises to you. I will sing, I will sing. This is how I thank the Lord. And this is how I thank the Lord for saving me when I was weak. This is how I thank the Lord for everything. This is how I thank the Lord.
As Emily and I go into these next 2 months, I just have 2 requests and want to invite us into communion as a people. First is this, lean in. God is not taking a break. There's a work of His Spirit that He has started. And I have come to learn that Jesus actually, it matters to Him to remind us, me most included in this. Church is not dependent on anybody but the Spirit of God. And He likes to show up, show off, and do things when we don't expect it. This is not a summer on neutral. This is a work of God. And Emily and I are going into a season of intimacy with Him because He made us a promise that a season is coming of mobilization and of an outpouring of His presence, and that we need to get away with Him so that He can equip us to do this. Lean in. And the second is this: love well. Be kind to each other. Be quick to forgive. Humble. Willing to listen. Find each other's needs. Serve one another. Outdo one another in hospitality. Don't wait to be asked, ask. Don't wait to be invited, invite. Be a unifier. Assume the best of other people. Don't read assumptions into intentions. Be vulnerable. Trust the Lord and stop believing lies. Stop believing them. Allow the Holy Spirit to actually lead you in a journey of what it means to know that you are the beloved of God. And there is therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And you do it all because you belong to a table that lacks nothing. And it's this table. It's the table of his blood and his body. So come on, would you do this with me? On the night before Jesus' death, he broke bread with his friends, his disciples, and he said, this is my body broken for you. Every time you take of it, remember me. Go ahead and take and eat. And then Jesus held a glass of wine and he said, this is the blood of a new covenant, shed for the forgiveness of sins. Every time you take of it, remember me. Go ahead and take and drink.